I just want to begin by thanking my dear friend Mercy Nerad and Barbara for inviting me to this workshop where I get an opportunity to listen to the people whose lives I try to protect each day, and that is academics. When people say to me, what do I do as a president of a regional accrediting commission, and I have to give a short answer, I say that my fundamental job, which I take very seriously, is to uphold the norms and values of the academy, to uphold academic freedom and institutional autonomy. And I stop, because that's what I believe fundamentally I do. And so it's a real honor and a privilege, and I thank you both for coming here to see how academics do, in fact, all over the world, try to uphold those norms and values. So it's a great pleasure to be here, part of this workshop. It's also nice, I have to say, on a lighter note, to be somewhere in a venue where if somebody says something nice to me or pays me a compliment, I suspect that they really mean it, since I'm not here to accredit them. I want to begin because Marissa has asked me to give short comments after each of the paper presentations, just to provide a little bit of a context for my remarks. And I'm going to ask you as well, because I'm still an academic at heart, to, in a moment or two, just write down, if you so wish, 4 guiding questions that I'd like you to keep in mind as you listen to the remainder of the presentations, including the discussion we'll have about Task Force 1. When I give my remarks through the lens of accreditation, I may be using the terms accreditation and quality assurance interchangeably. There are terms used like audits in parts of Europe, quality assurance, accreditation. I'm going to use them interchangeably. The purposes of accreditation are really twofold. One is accountability, and the second is a notion that we actually picked up from the corporate world. One could say we borrowed it, Professor Yamamoto, from Japan, the notion of, let me see if I'm saying it right, Kaizen? Kaizen, continuous improvement. And so we're really about accountability and continuous improvement. I start from the assumption that doctoral education does not take place in a vacuum. Doctoral education does not take place in a void, but rather, for our purposes here at this workshop, I make the assumption that it is university-based. That is to say, it takes place in the structure of a university. We know that there are exceptions to this rule. You have Max Planck Institutes, you have the Rockefeller University, etc. But for our purposes here, we assume that it takes place in the structure of a university. So the unit of analysis is doctoral education. But the focus of that unit of analysis is the structure of the university in terms of the socio-political environment in which it operates. And that's an important notion, because as I read the 3 very, very interesting papers, and as we will participate and have discussions, it's important that we think about doctoral education vis-a-vis the university, and even more importantly, vis-a-vis the socio-political environment in which it exists, whether that environment be Calgary, Sao Paulo, Penang, or Kassel. Furthermore, there are really multiple ways in which I could have approached the lens of accreditation as Marissa gave me this assignment. This was a strange assignment for me because there were no benchmarks, no set of criteria, which I realize I've become so dependent on, so enslaved by, or not enslaved by, but so guided by, much more positive way of looking at it, to which to really assess various papers or presentations. So there were no sets of criteria. There were no benchmarks. And so what I tried to do was do it through the views of how would we be able to implement the policies and practices, more which we'll hear from Professor Zameta later on today, and how would the universities be able to accomplish the goals, and what would we have to do? As we discuss the three papers, I would hope that you would ask the same following questions that I've asked as I've read these papers. And they are as follows. 1, to what extent are the plans, policies, and practices, the plans, policies, and practices, compatible with the mission and purposes of the university? And as you think about this, you can think about your own university, regardless of where you are in the world. Or you can think about the universities in your own respective country. Second guiding question, to what extent is there congruence between what the university professes that it does and how it rewards and evaluates its faculty? I'll repeat that. To what extent is there congruence? To what extent is there compatibility between what the university professes it does and how it rewards its faculty and evaluates its faculty for doing what they do? This kind of a question speaks to three important issues in quality assurance, whether we're talking about quality assurance in Mexico, in Australia, in Malaysia, or the United States. And that is the issue of integrity, the issue of disclosure, and a third issue which is becoming increasingly important worldwide, and that is the whole notion of transparency. We no longer can do in universities what we did perhaps 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago and say, trust us. We have very intelligent people teaching and guiding us. We keep our students to the task, and no one really needs to ask us what we do. That we know is a world we no longer live in. Third guiding question. How does the university, how does your university assess its own results of its own effectiveness and performance? I'll repeat that. How does the university, your university, assess its own results of its effectiveness and performance? So when we're looking at policies and practices that were so nicely articulated by Margaret on behalf of her group, that will create a different flow of intellectual capital and eradicate inequalities, what is your university doing to try to implement policies towards those end goals? And lastly, the question that I asked, which is a question most social scientists ask, is what is really missing? What is missing from the framework that we need to ask and think about in order to accomplish the goals of the respective task forces?